Hello and welcome. My name is Ben Atkinson. I'm the co-owner of Go2 Studio here in Charlottesville and the co-producer, director, and co-star of our upcoming presentation of Class, a play by Charles Evered. And I'm joined today by the playwright himself.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I'm glad you're here. Evered is a playwright, screenwriter, and director holding an MFA from Yale University, where he studied with director George Roy Hill. His distinguished career includes several awards for his writing, such as the Crawford Award. Tell me if I get any of these wrong.
Sure.
The Marilla Kerr Award, is that how you pronounce
right.
that? And the Alfred P. Sloan Fellowship at the Manhattan Theater Club, among others. Welcome, Charles. Or as I know him, Chuck.
Chuck, absolutely. It's great to be here in Seville. Do
Yeah.
you call yourselves Seville?
You know what? I think it splits.
Oh, really?
It goes either way.
Is it an insult to anyone?
No, I think there's. I just know that it's one of those things when I was in high school where if you said Seville in Seville, people would be like, "Oh, you're one of those." You know what I mean?
Like you don't have the time to say the whole word. I'm so busy.
Yeah, or just there's definitely a publication in town that's named after that.
I thought maybe that's where I got it.
Maybe. I mean, it's a very common thing. I don't know what the stigma is.
Well, I'm glad to be in Charlottesville. Whatever the hell you call this place. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here too. First of all, I just want to tell everyone a little bit about Class. So the logline, and we can't give too much away. That's the thing. There's a lot. The play is beautifully written. Everyone,
Thank you.
I say that, but everyone who's had a chance to take a look at our production of it, one of the things that they say is just how much they love the writing, on it, how impressed they are with the play itself. No surprise given the
Thanks,
given the credits.
I appreciate it.
Of course. So I can't give too much away.
Okay.
But I will use the logline that's on the publisher's website, which is. A mysterious young woman shows up in the studio of a famed acting teacher in New York City, which is not much as far as the draw.
Nugget.
So I'll add this. So let it suffice to say that it deals with themes like artistic accomplishment, degrees of fame, of success, of failure, of loss, and a reminder that what we do can matter even if it isn't exactly what we hoped for ourselves.
True. That's all true.
Okay, so that's what I'll give them as far as what this is about. we can go into it even further.
That sounds good. When we describe all those things, it's I don't remember. You look back, what state of mind was I in when I started this?
Right.
And as you had mentioned at one point, it was based on a mentor of mine who's still with us, thankfully, and a brilliant actor named Austin Pendleton. All your viewers have seen him. If they don't know his name, they've seen him, right? So, and I, coming up in the arts, and you know this, is that the only way I got a leg up was with people who gave a you-know-what about me when they didn't have to, right? So they saw something in me where they thought I can learn something. And I had a great English teacher named Hugh Thomas, who, if people look him up, was in the original show of The Fantastics, which is a very famous musical that you might know, but not everybody will know. But theater people love The Fantastics because it ran for about 50 years off Broadway. It was the little engine that could, it really wasn't that popular at first. They hung on and they just kept playing it. And so to have a teacher in high school when I was sitting there with my, Jethro Tull t-shirt on and my boots, my Herman's boots, and have him care about Shakespeare and have him care about drama and have him care about all those things. And seeing something in me where when I would write these little papers, he'd say, hey, you have a little bit of talent, as a writer. First time that ever happened. So those mentors in my life made me write Class and made me think, well, this is kind of an homage or a thank you to them, and that's been fun about it.
So that actually brings the question. So at that time, was that the primary impetus for the writing of Class, was thinking I want to pay tribute to these mentors, as you said, or was there any other spark that sort of where that came in and you said like, oh, that's an additional element of it?
It's all my plays. That's exactly what happens with them. Is I'll think I have that original spark, which might start it, and then what I love about playwriting is it's not necessarily the money, because that could go up and down.
Sure.
But so you write plays like you act because you love it, and you see where that takes you. Sometimes you act and it's a company that you really dig. You meet some amazing people that inspire you. Sometimes you go to LA and do something, great people or not, or whatever. Go to New York, go all over the country, right? Well, when you write a play and it goes to different places, that play takes you and it introduces you to different people. And so this play, among several of mine, and it's just a few have done this in a great way, but it takes me to places literally where I meet people, and I get to learn and I get to see new places. So it's sort of like a magic carpet. Literally, you're kind of holding on, and you just say, please take me somewhere that inspires me, even if this stinks or that person isn't the greatest to work with or they didn't really get the production or whatever. You're still meeting people and you're still finding all these different things. So the impetus was to do an homage or a thank you to mentors, but also because I wanted to write a love story with unlikely people in it. In other words, this isn't a traditional love story, although we could agree that these two characters love each other in a very special way. But I wanted to write a kind of unusual love story that way. Can two people who are almost completely different, when you think about their philosophies, again, without giving anything away, that the student is in one world, right? And she regards things as this being important or this is important to her, where he's in a whole nother world where his attitudes toward art are very different from hers. So when you put people like that in a room together, what happens? Hopefully conflict, and it does. And then through working out that conflict, we learn things and they learn things. And that's really why I write. That's why I wrote it.
That's wonderful.
Thanks.
That's incredible. Yeah. So to the folks who watching who might not realize this, I'm playing the character of Elliot, which is the acting teacher in the show.
Yes.
And it's been incredibly helpful to know your inspiration with Hugh Thomas and with Austin Pendleton.
Right.
I will refer everyone to check out Starring Austin Pendleton.
Yeah.
It's a 20-minute short documentary that's available on Amazon.
Oh, is it good?
And Chuck appears in it.
Right.
But it's a really fascinating look, and it's sort of ironic in the right way that it's so short. It makes me sad that it's so short.
He should get a feature.
Right, he absolutely should, but that's sort of
kind of ironic.
Thematic, or maybe ironic is not the right word, but certainly thematic.
It's true.
And you see people like Meryl Streep or Philip Seymour Hoffman in there talking about Ethan Hawke in there talking about his influence on them and the impact that he had. And I think that's, again, emblematic of what sort of Elliot's character is in this show, as someone who is only known within the certain circles, but then who has this impact beyond it.
Yeah, and who is cool because he's uncool. And because they decided that's not what I'm going for. We can make choices, can't we? If we're lucky, we can make choices in which we'll put ourselves in this world or that world. And then hopefully as we grow as artists, we think, but that's not important to me as much. It's not just money. I'm not against money at all, but some people make choices in which they'll say, I'm not going to go try to do that because I really want to save myself for Shakespeare, or I want to save myself for the greats and the classics, Right. And those people inspire me in a huge way, as do people, and I think you feel this way too, as do people who do great commercial work that reaches a lot of people and that has a wonderful message or whatever. Right. I'm in awe of them too. It's a different choice that you make, and I think so many times young artists, and I was one of them, think that it's bifurcated. Is that the word? It's like one or the other, right? So if I do well and make money, I'm a sellout. If I'm poor, then I'm a real artist. Well, I wish it were that simple, Sometimes in our careers, we're both,
Absolutely.
And hopefully we're both, And I used to, when I talked to Austin, he taught me many things, but I remember, we would walk down the street and people, of course, recognize him. They don't know his name, but they've seen him in a million movies. And I remember being in some kind of class of his, because he would do like $20 auditing classes in like churches. Like he did it in Newton, Massachusetts once when we were in school.
Okay.
And I would find out that Austin is teaching acting in Newton Presbyterian Church in the basement for $20, like literally, because he was doing a show somewhere near there.
Sure.
So I would go find him, and I'd be like, hey, you want to have dinner later? He's like, yeah, I've got to do this show, and he would be talking, and I'd be like, I'm with a world-class actor, like that everyone knows, like in the world.
Yeah.
And he's charging people $20,
right?
And they might not even know him. You know what I mean? They're just like, they saw the poster.
Right.
So, but to see him care that much in that kind of venue really taught me a lesson, which is like, don't be a snob ever. It's the work. That's all that matters, the quality of the work. What story are you telling? If you could make yourself, and we have this talk a million times as professor or student or whatever, if you could make choices in your life in which you can sustain the work while still being able to live and breathe and eat and maybe pay a few bills, that's gold,
Right.
Make those choices that allow you to do that.
Well, I will jump in here because there's something off of that I want to ask you and I remember to ask you. But now might be a good time to mention that you were in fact my screenwriting teacher at Emerson College many years ago.
I remember it well.
And I can't believe it's been as long as it has. We won't drop exactly.
It's too long.
Yeah, but it goes by so fast.
You've gotten younger. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what deal you made, Dorian Gray.
That's incredibly kind. My hairline would disagree with you. It's just all moved down here.
That's right. We just call our hairline something else. I call my hairline my beard.
Yes, exactly. So it's worth mentioning that, and I think it's fascinating because I've had a handful, maybe if that many, of people in my life that I would consider a mentor. And you're one of them.
I hope
you're
so.
one of the first people that I think thought like, oh, this person is my mentor.
Great.
And it's really interesting to hear you talk about yours, and it's from sitting over here.
Right.
To be like, oh,
we pass it forward. It paid forward.
Exactly. Exactly.
Definitely.
I was pleased. This is me sort of ringing my own bell, I guess, at this point.
Ring away.
But the first time I have been called mentor is during this process with our co-star.
That's great.
With my co-star for
fantastic.
this show. And I was
see.
Yeah, I mean,
it goes on.
My heart was not ready for that.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. No, that makes me feel good.
Great. Yeah. So now that we're done patting ourselves on the back for that.
Somebody's got to do it, Ben.
True.
And if they won't, we will. Damn it.
So two things. One, when it comes to Elliot, since we are already talking about that, and tell me if I'm right or embellish as needed. So when I looked at Hugh Thomas and I looked at Austin Pendleton, Austin clearly has the teacher, everything you've just talked about.
Yeah.
I love that there's a line in the play when you said $20 an hour in audit. That's the line.
Yeah, I think I just stole it from that situation.
Just lifted it out of that situation. Yeah. But it's interesting to me that Austin is the teacher, and Hugh was a teacher as well, not to discredit that.
Right.
But Austin has a certain level of success.
Sure.
Mr. Pendleton, I should say. I feel very too familiar
Austin,
saying.
everybody knows him as Austin, literally.
But that's, he, despite not being renowned, hence the irony of the title starring Austin Pendleton, he still works and is known within the industry very well. Right. And to some degree, Elliot's like that, but also there is an obscurity. There is a no longer working quality to
he stopped.
Elliot,
Right.
exactly,
He stopped.
that made me think maybe that came more from Mr. Thomas.
That's true.
Is that true?
No, that's a really interesting insight. That's great. Because you're making me realize that for the first time, because when I had the pleasure of meeting him, he was literally teaching English in Rutherford, New Jersey, which was, obviously a suburb of New York City. He had, looking back now and understanding those careers better, he was someone who was phenomenally successful. That you and I would go, wow. I mean, he premiered a major thing, but at the same time, he didn't feel that way. So he switched out of acting and he became an English teacher. Right. And also, it should be said, he had a lifestyle, that being a man who happened to be gay in suburban New Jersey, that wasn't the easiest thing in the world in 1979 to 83, right? So when he walks in with literally a lime green jacket and black Hamlet shoes and pink pants, and walks into this room of suburban kids with the Jethro Tull T-shirts and and everybody's playing Freebird, and it's just not a very he's a rare creature, the Cage of Fall, he's very exotic to us. Well, but yet I was fascinated by that because I thought it took great courage. I thought, what, are you kidding me? This guy's walking in like this, he'll get nothing but derision behind his back and stuff and he did, but yet he owned himself and he said, this is who I am. We didn't have Google back then, right? So we couldn't put in Hugh Thomas and it would say he's done this and this and this. So we just assumed, he's just the guy who needed to teach.
Sure.
He didn't even talk about, which I thought was really interesting, he didn't even talk about his acting career. But he would do scenes from the plays of Shakespeare and he would enact them in front of us, which caused him to get derision or giggles from the crowd of kids, except for a few of us, right? Because he's kind of brilliant, right? So he's doing Julius Caesar, and he's doing Julius Caesar, and he's doing Brutus.
Sure.
Right? So he's stabbing himself in front of us, right? But we don't notice because he's so frigging good about going from one to the other that he'll do the scene. And then he collapsed, literally, on the floor. And, this kid's like, and I'm like, what? I mean, what is it about this guy that has that? It reminds me of Sting's Englishman in New York, that song. Have you ever heard it?
Of course.
It's about, what's the artist? Oh, God, he's famous. The Naked Civil Servant.
That one I don't know.
Yeah, Sting wrote it about that artist, and then Sting visited him. He was living in the East, in the Lower East Side, and he was poor, and he wasn't getting any money from anybody, and he was trying to, it was hard for him to work. Oh, gosh, we'll have to look it up. But,
Yeah, no, the internet's going crazy right now.
well, they'll know. I mean,
Anyone
I'm
watching
embarrassed
is like,
not to
how
know.
could you not know?
No, so he wrote the Naked Civil Servant, but that song is about that, which is that look how courage can be in many forms, right? And so, but it's a great thing that you bring up about Mr. Thomas by then must have given up on some level, and that makes me sad because he also died a year or two after I had him. You know, he died at a very possibly young age.
And before I circle back to my other question, because I want to ask you also about Sarah as a character and the inspiration there. But before we get, I'm putting a pin in that for myself really more than anything. The inspiration, I remember reading this in an article somewhere, so I wanted to hear it in your words. Mr. Thomas was sort of your beginning moment with theater.
Yeah.
I mean, you personally, right? The beginning of your journey.
Never occurred to me before that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it never, and then right after that, I started a theater company when I was working as a janitor, literally as a janitor with the little local theater there in Rutherford, and we started a theater because, you know, we took a bus to the drama bookshop, me and a couple other people, and we said, hey, we need to do plays. We want to do plays. And they said, well, you have to pay for them, both the book and you have to pay for the rights to them. Well, we didn't have any money. So then somebody said, well, just write them yourselves. It never occurred to me that I could write a play. So I did it out of necessity, where I wrote like a little collection of short plays, of which most were horrible. But I wrote them because I couldn't afford to rent them. So that's how it began organically, because by that time, I had already found out I would not be a good baseball player and I wouldn't make it to college level, which stung because I really wanted to be a baseball. And my guidance counselor said, Mr. Pepe, he said, Chuck, you're not going to make it as a baseball player. And I was like, are you sure, man? Have you really looked into my stats? But becoming a writer was very organic after that, you know, and so that these people along the way, from George Ray Hill to everybody, inspired me, whether they were conscious of it or not, you know.
Sure. Well, so on that note, so doubling back now, we've talked a little bit about Elliot and the inspiration there, and that seems deeply rich and personal. Tell me a little bit about choosing the character of Sarah, if there is a prototype or not, or if it came more from, without giving too much away, we can say, I think, pretty safely, as we've said in other public things we've talked about on our marketing so far, but the character of Sarah has had some level of success. We'll just say that much.
Okay, yeah.
But in that regard, what would you say, if there is anything specific that
you know, I recall, I don't know if this will give something away, but I remember being inspired by Lindsay Lohan.
Oh, okay.
Okay, who you must know of as like your
Sure, of course,
right?
yeah.
So
she came up in rehearsal the other night, in fact.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's interesting because I don't know if we ever talked about it. So that's interesting.
I don't think so.
But I remember, and so my daughter, I think my son was, you know, they grew up in their early teens on her movies when she was really happening and blah blah blah. And I remember thinking, oh, who's this Lindsay Lohan? And I remember thinking I remember she was getting a lot of crap in the media about her partying or what they thought was her partying, where she came from. She wasn't, you know, she was really big with those movies, and then she would go to New York and something would happen with the family, and she was getting all this awful attention. And I remember thinking, that's too bad, because she was a kid. She was getting a lot of that stuff when she was a kid, and it was the way. And then I saw her in one of those movies that my kids were watching, and I thought, oh, she's good. That complicates things, right? Because she's not just a flash in the pan, right? Or she's not just has one quality and then she's gone, or whatever. I thought, oh, she's a good actress. That must be awful for her. You know what I mean? But that complication interested me, and I thought, I would love to write a character that might encompass all those different things.
Fascinating.
So sort of like a commercial vaunting success, but also having this sort of kind of sound in your background or a voice in your head saying, I could be better. I could be a real actor. And if I want to be a real actor, where do I go? Well, I must go to a real actor. And then if you do some research, you find, oh, this guy won this award off Broadway 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Oh, this guy won this award. Oh, look, people are writing things about how great a teacher he was. He might be somewhat problematic, a little grumpy, but he's a great teacher. And she, through whatever's happening in her life, is compelled to say, this is a time in my life, I have to take it now. I'm going to find this dude, and I'm going to look him up, and I'm going to make him teach me, and I'm going to become a real actor.
I love that.
Yeah, so that's her journey. But it came from Lindsay Lohan.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, and it makes perfect sense. But that idea that you have that image of this person you don't know in real life, but then what you're deriving, and you combine it, you put them up against this composite of people you do know, and it's amazing to watch that play out.
As it turns out, I was right, wasn't I? Yeah. I mean, she's a really terrific actor.
Oh, yes.
I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
undervalued and blah blah. And now she's doing deals, right, with Hallmark and stuff, and and those movies are great, and she's great in them. So when I see them with my daughter Margaret, I'm like, yeah, man, way to go. She had a valley like we all do, and she came out of it.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I haven't kept up.
I'll admit. You don't know what you're missing. Get through this run and then have a Lindsay
a full Lindsay-thon.
Right, exactly.
But so now into the actual class work, in class. So I'll say when I first saw it, as I've said before, was when it's actually this production, the one that's on the cover of the book.
In L.A., yeah.
In L.A. at the Falcon Theater, now the Gary Marshall Theater. Named for its owner, late, great Gary Marshall, who I actually got to meet that evening, thanks to you, which is incredible.
Wasn't he amazing?
He was amazing.
And just like a guy you meet at the dentist.
It's funny, I was debating even bringing this up, but I will say that in my time in Los Angeles, my time trying to make it or whatever, you are responsible single-handedly for me meeting the most celebrities. I could run down the list. I mean, there's celebrities of different era, everyone from Edward Albee to Eric Stoltz.
You were in that?
I was there for Edward Albee when he came by Emerson.
And Sting.
And then I was in a living room reading and Sting, of course, yes. Sting, who has already come up on this conversation.
No, what's funny about Sting is that were you one of the few I told he was actually coming?
Oh, I wish we had time. We don't have time. But the story of how that came to be is one of my favorite stories to tell.
Because you might not have come.
No, well, no, I will say that I'll sum it up by saying that Chuck systematically and carefully removed people who would just be there because it was Sting. By lying.
I did.
By essentially lying about who was going to be there and why, step by step, week by week, until finally at the last one,
7 of you.
On my way out the door, I hear I'm the last person to leave, and I just hear Chuck lean over to me and go, "It's actually Sting. Sting's actually going to be here." And I was like, "Wow!"
So what a great class that was.
That was.
Do you remember when we almost cried, or he cried?
Oh yeah. I mean, that was quite the day for me.
I couldn't believe it.
It was an extraordinary event.
I was literally moved to tears.
He was there reading sections of his book.
Father dying.
Broken Music is the name of the memoir for anyone who's interested. And it's an extraordinary book, and it hit me at an extraordinary time in my life personally, which I got to say to him thanks to you.
That's great.
Which is wonderful.
Great.
But and then there was I think before the late great Luke Perry passed away. I was sitting and reading in the living room one of your screenplays with Luke Perry. So that's the name dropping section.
No, it's not the name, but yet it was all organic.
That's true.
It was work.
Yeah, that's true. But it's just funny. It's sort of a funny little pattern in my life that is due to you.
Oh, I'm happy to help.
Well, thank you. But back to the idea of the actual class itself. When I saw it, the reason I brought that up was to say I was in my 20s at that time, seeing, again, I recommend everyone, of course, come see the show.
Yeah.
But it's unrelenting. It's very honest about what celebrity is and about what success is and about what failure is in the theater. And it's also extremely honest about what the craft of acting is. I'll say honest, I don't know if that's the right word, accurate or exploratory. There's all of these words that I could use to describe it. And it's honestly been an interesting challenge for me as playing Elliot as an actor to be up there talking about the thing I'm doing. Which is its own.
It's meta.
It's very meta in that way, and it puts kind of a microscope on the situation, which has been actually a really fun challenge and a lesson in and of itself. But what it fascinates me is, and I heard you mention this off camera earlier, you spent some time as an actor as well, right? That I don't think I fully knew, and I was.
There's a reason.
But my question was, and it's still valid, I guess, then, as someone who's mostly and professionally a writer and director who's worked with actors, the way it's described and the way it's approached in the play is so subjective and so, I don't know if ephemeral is the right word, but it gets at the thing that's sort of beyond what can be described.
Yeah, the pretension.
Not only the pretension, but, well, again, I recommend people come see it, but there's this sort of, it's almost to this Zen level of being present and all of that, but a way of describing it, which is, I thought, now especially looking back as someone who's been through a bunch of stuff and tried and failed and all these things, to be like, it encompasses epiphanies I hadn't yet had the first time I saw it. So my question to you is, as someone who's primarily a writer, how did that come straight from Pendleton and the things that you heard? Was it like quoting them, or was this something that you experienced or observed
great question.
in actors?
I think I could rightfully say it's both. And the reason I'm not copping out with that answer is because I had the same experience you do, which is, first of all, my acting career was like 7 months of embarrassing stuff that no one will ever see. Unless they watch the Frankie Valli Street Fighter video. But I'll just leave that there.
Okay.
But anyways, just kidding. I'm like in the background acting like a fighter. It's horrible.
But you're tall enough.
It's horrible.
You'll show up.
But anyway, so, but the great thing about my little attempt at being an actor was because, and it's what every writer and director should do, we just give it a shot. If not for career, just give it a shot for auditions, for humiliation, for modesty, for humility, for knowing what it's like to try to put yourself out there so that when I work with you or talk to you about something, I'm not just, I can say I know what that's like, you know, to want to just disappear. So that was a great, so I really appreciate that period for that, you know. As far as the mechanics of the acting teaching stuff, that's from having been a student, you know, or watching Austin teach, and from having people like Hugh Thomas, right, or George Ray Hill talk about acting and directing, working with Redford and Newman and how he approached them. And then I would watch some behind-the-scenes stuff with him and go, oh, that's just what he said in class, so I could really understand that. And how you have to work with different actors. When he worked with Laurence Olivier, is different from when you work with Newman. They're just very different actors, you know? So I watched and learned, I practiced it as a director, and I got a little bit better every time. I started to understand what a vocabulary was, you know? It also stripped away all, when I mentioned pretension, that guru kind of stuff that makes me and you and everybody uncomfortable. When you look back, I saw when I was at Williamstown, I was one of Joanne Woodward's assistants for, she was directing Golden Boy, right? Clifford Odets' Golden Boy. And I was basically somebody who got coffee in the room, but I was in the room, right? So I watched her direct this play that was born in the group theater that was written by Clifford Odets and directed, I think, by Elia Kazan, or Kazan might have been in it, right? So then Joanne is a student of, I think it was Bobby Lewis and Stella Adler, right? So she would talk about her experiences with these greats of American theater. I'm sitting there listening, and while she was doing that, she was making a documentary about, which is now available, by the way, on YouTube. She was making a documentary back then about the group theater and about what happened to everybody. You know, everybody came together in the early 30s. The Depression had just happened. They came together with all the best intentions. They really revolutionized theater, literally, or acting, and the way you approach acting, how it's taught. But they also went in their different ways, didn't they? Like Harold Clurman went one way, Stella Adler went one way, and Lee Strasberg went one way. And he had a certain extremity about how he taught and what the rules were. Right. That was very guru-like, right? And then he also, looking over at somebody like Bobby Lewis, was much more, do what you want, you know? I mean, you'll feel it. If you want to use these rules, go ahead and do it. So all those things fascinated me. So I got like a great background in them.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I thought to myself, well, how do I, in a character of Elliot, he would have been someone that would have been exposed to all of those teachers. He would have, you know, at some point come to the idea that I don't really like Mr. Strasberg's take, or I think I really understand this, or who studied with these people? Well, De Niro, right? And Marlon and Meryl Streep, and people that we see now on the screen studied with these people. So it's a line, it's a living line. It's not dead in books, right? Right. But in that, you have to find your path. And that's all he says, but again, without giving it away. Right. That's all Elliot, the teacher, says to Sarah, the student, is understand these are certain rules. You know, it's good to know them. It's what I'm sure I told you when we were working as you working as a screenwriter and I was a professor, which is that you should know 3 acts. You should read every book, right? In Barnes and Noble's, the cat thing, the cat book. Or, right. You know what I mean? All those things are meant to be known, and there's great information in those. Then forget them. Right. But ingest them. Then find Ben Atkinson's way of doing a screenplay, of writing a screenplay, you know?
That's absolutely true, I think. I mean, not having, you know, any personal great success in screenwriting, but having gone through this journey over years of attempting and learning and all that, you're a really pattern, good writer. That's very nice. You're a really good writer, man. But that pattern.
I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't talk. I really wouldn't. Think I come to
I
see
appreciate
for you?
it.
Yeah, come on. You're good.
Yes, thank you for being. That pattern, though, whether it is acting, whether it is writing, that pattern seems to be the consistent thing. That's what I've observed, and I've come to it on my own, having forgotten that I'd heard it somewhere else.
Right.
Then I'll hear it somewhere else,
Right.
and then I'll come back to it. And it is incredible, just to kind of comment on this, and again, kind of get back into the name dropping, but it's funny. It's incredible. You list those acting teachers, and you can, the tree, the flow, the outflow.
Where the branches go.
All the way to literally every actor today.
Yeah.
Every actor working will eventually come to one of those paths, or to, I saw Brando in Streetcar and that made me want to be an actor.
Right.
Like all of these different things that, I mean, you hear it over and over. I was just listening to the, to bring it into the modern day, like the Smartless podcast, which is the Sean Hayes and Will Arnett and Jason Bateman have this podcast.
Oh, I love that.
They're fantastic.
I heard that, yeah. Down to earth, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they laugh at themselves. It's great.
And they had, now it's just, I can't believe I just lost his name. That's incredible. Sam Rockwell. Sam Rockwell was in their most recent episode.
Yeah.
And literally having this conversation about the work and him pointing to Hoffman. Phil Hoffman as one of the first
Isn't that funny? You say that, I think Dustin, you think Phil.
That's
generational.
It's generational. And actually, if I'd heard it said, I probably would have thought Dustin too, frankly. But because we just mentioned him, Phil Hoffman was on his list of people who majorly influenced him. And having just watched the Austin Pendleton documentary myself, I was like, how incredible that these flows of influence just keep circling around.
They're just rivers that run through you, literally. You know, and if you plug into them, it's really helpful to know that people have gone before you and tried to figure this stuff out.
Exactly.
And also that they don't know the answers, and that's okay.
Right. And
that's okay.
But those patterns of, let's call it truth for the sake of it, like it's all, this comes back into sort of the Zen thing, which is that like Zen isn't the moon, it's the finger pointing at the moon. You've ever heard this?
Right.
So it's similar. It's like all these different methods are all pointing at the thing.
Right, that's right.
Right. So truth by any name is still truth.
Totally.
Right. So
it's a path.
That's what I think is fascinating about that. That whole creative process of discovering that there is no one way.
There isn't. No. And I remember, I mean, just to go back to people we've worked with is, when I directed Adopt a Sailor as a movie, it starred Peter Coyote and Bebe Neuwirth.
That's right.
Very different actors, right? But at the end of the process, it was a great pleasure to work with them, and they really were nice to do such a small film. But Peter gave me a book called, everybody knows about it, it's called The Beginner's Mind, right?
I am not everybody.
I think it's about, it's a Buddhist book because I only direct Buddhist priests in feature films. Because Michael O'Keefe is also a Buddhist priest.
Amazing.
I didn't know that.
This is what
I will not talk to anyone else. But so he gives me this book called The Beginner's Mind. It's exactly what it implies, which is that you have to approach everything that you think you know as a beginner. You're always a student. You know, you've heard that axiom. But,
sure.
But to really understand that, which is to go into every, just putting it like in a relationship, right? You come from, whether it's a romantic relationship or whatever, if you engage in another one, you have to at some point put the other behind you, because you have to say, I need to treat this person as the new open book that they are, and hopefully they'll treat me that way, because if I bring it all, you really give yourself a lot of weight there, you know, and a lot of things to run up against. So you have to always come at a project like you're just beginning and be open. You know, remember in that little, in that documentary, Ethan says about Austin, he's like a little elf, right? Spreading magic in all these different rooms. It's exactly what he is, you know? And like, that's the heart of his career. People will remember his great work and that he's Tony nominated and that he's a great director, and that they'll remember that in the books, but what they'll remember in their heart is, oh, he just come into a room and didn't care who you were, how much money you had, didn't care who you knew, if you're connected or not. If you had something interesting to say, he wants to hear it. And I've seen it when I've been his assistant, and I've seen it in the room when he auditions. People really taught me a great lesson. You know how, you know, as an actor, you know, those rooms can be bad, right? You could walk into and you just feel, right, the wall go up and the eyes of judgment and stuff like that. But he wasn't, he would be in the middle of something, right? So people would come in, he'd be in the middle of doing something, and he'd be like, oh, hi, you know, and he would be the same way to a world famous actor as he would to a student. I'm not making that up. He just doesn't care. Like he doesn't care about strata and levels. You know, he doesn't, because that's so destructive. That thinking is so destructive. Right. When you think you know more or you know better or whatever, it stops creativity right away. Right. And so that was his lesson, you know, the best thing of all, which is don't judge. Try not to judge. It's always in us to judge. It's hard to stop sometimes, and also it's easy to get tired, right, as an artist.
Oh yes.
but we have to kind of stay open and keep that mode of communication open.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Definitely.
Absolutely. So you said a couple of things that I want to double back on. I want to talk to you about Adopt a Sailor, and I want to ask you about the current tour that's going on.
Okay.
Just to get that out
Sure.
there. But you mentioned BB Newirth being in the film, which
Right.
is fantastic.
Yeah.
But if I remember what I read correctly, she also directed a stage reading of Class at one point, did she not?
She did.
I know very little about this other than the fact that it existed.
Yeah.
Were you able to take that in? Were you?
It was in my town of Princeton, New Jersey.
Oh, great.
So she was. She's in Princeton all the time. She lives in New York, but is in Princeton all the time. And then we knew each other when Adopt a Sailor was a 10-minute play and was done at Town Hall. It was written in response to the attacks of 9/11, in which they asked a lot of New York playwrights to do a little piece based on the attacks. And of course, as everybody knows, nobody wanted to touch anything about it. It was just like touching a nuclear reactor. It just wasn't something you wanted to do your art on because you felt you were defiling it, right? So they called and they said, hey, would you do this little 10-minute thing? And I said, of course not, I can't do that. And then put the phone down. And then somebody else called and said, hey, they're doing this thing. Do you think you could do it? I said, I have nothing to say. Just don't. This is probably 8 months after it. And it was just a very hard time personally for me and my family and everybody's family. It was just a hard, because I also grew up in the shadow of those towers, right? So I understood the size of it, the scope of it, the horror of it, as we all did. But so finally they called one more time and said, hey, would you just do this? And I said, absolutely not. And I hung up the phone and I wrote it. And because I needed to, right?
Sure.
And I wrote this play and I sent it in not knowing what the heck's going to happen. And then I remember the woman who's running the program at the town hall, she said, well, everybody wants to do it, right? So everybody wants to do it. So they did a cast of Eli Wallach and Ann Jackson, right? You must know Mr. Wallach from the Eastwood films.
Okay.
But also a theatrical legend. His wife, Ann Jackson, theatrical legend. Sam Waterston did it. Liev did it.
That's Liev Schreiber.
Right. Liev did it, and Amy Irving did it, right? So BB did it. And then the kid was, oh God, I love him. I don't mean to remember his TV thing, but Doogie Howser.
Oh, Neil Patrick Harris.
Yes, Neil Patrick Howser did it. And the kid, so suddenly all these people were doing different versions on different nights, right? So I was like, oh, I guess it struck a chord. And then I saw it, I forget which night I saw, but the New York Times was there and had something nice to say about it, which I was like, oh, that's nice. Nice of them to say something nice. Then it had this life. And then about a year later, I was working for Andy Breckman, who created Monk, right? And then he said, I really like that short play. I will commission you to write a long version. And I was like, Andy, why? Like, I didn't want to write the first one, right? And I had nothing in me. Everything had been deposited in this short. So then I thought, okay, well, look, when your friend says that to you, and he's a writer that you really admire, what am I going to say now? So I wrote a longer version. Now that took out the specificity of 9/11 because I wanted it to have a life beyond that. And already, as you well know, there were already like 9/11 things coming out of everywhere. Now suddenly, like a year later, everybody wrote about 9/11.
Right.
So I wanted to write, something different about that. Did that, and then it was premiered in a little off-Broadway theater in 2006 or something. And then my publisher published it, and I thought, that's it. That's it. So I had a little run, and I'm thankful that it touched some hearts, and that's fine. Then I moved my family to Palm Desert, California, and I'm picking my kid up, Margaret, up at the little school that we put her in, and I'm waiting in the parking lot, and a very nice lady standing over there. And I said, hi, and she says, hi, and she said, what do you do? I said, oh, I'm a writer. She said, oh, I'm a producer. I said, that's great, but it's in California, and everybody is, and so it means absolutely nothing. So we talked a little bit more, and she said, well, yeah, I really want to do so, but do you have anything you can send me? I said, well, I wrote this play. It was based on a short play of mine, but I thought maybe it could be a good movie. She goes, send it to me. So it's like, oh, sure. Again, like you just assume everything's a lie, right?
Right, sure.
So I sent it to her, and then she, an hour and a half later, she writes back, and she says, oh, I want to make this movie. And I said, oh, that's so sweet. That's really, God bless you. That's wonderful. I've never heard that before. But So she said, no, I really want it. It ended up being Kim Waltrip, right?
Okay.
I don't know if you met Kim.
I believe I did.
Yeah, so great producer, a very good friend of mine. And she's like, well, I really want to make this. And here's the best thing was, she said, well, who will direct it? And I said, without flinching, I said, oh, I'll direct it. I'll do it. Now, she didn't know enough to say no to me. Right? She didn't realize, like, every playwright wants to direct their friggin' film.
And then she learned her lesson.
Yeah, she did years later. But no, true.
Kidding.
But so we developed it. Nobody wanted to finance it, of course, because nobody's crazy. You know, it's like a little play, you know? And we were going to shoot it in the desert for New York, and it was just a nightmare. But so she found somebody, a very nice man named Mike, to give us enough to make the movie, and the rest. And I said, well, how are we going to do New York? We have to go to New York. She said, I'll just put in my credit card. I'll put in my card. I was like, I love you, right? So that's how Adopt-A-Sailor got made. It got made in 12 days.
Wow. In
the desert, right? We built that apartment set in the desert in August to 125 degrees. That's the idea, you know?
Right,
and then
right.
we did some shooting in New York for the street scenes, and we got amazing actors. Young Ethan Peck, right?
Who's now Mr. Spock.
He's the biggest famous person in the world who owes me lots of money. I'm only kidding, Ethan. Not that much.
Live long and prosper.
Yeah, good for you. I'm really happy for you. No, he was wonderful. He was wonderful. And BB and Peter did it, and that's how that happened. And then that had a life. The film had a life after that, and I couldn't believe it. But it was not planning, you know?
Right. And so I do want to circle back to her directing class, because that really does interest me. I know nothing about it.
Yeah.
But I don't want to...
It was simply me saying, hey, BB, we're around the same town. I just wrote this play. I don't know if it's a play yet. There's a place in Princeton called the Princeton Arts Council, and they were working with me. I was an artist in residence there or something, and they said, anytime you need to use a space. So I said, hey, BB, can you direct it? I'd love for you to do it. And she said, you know who'd be great for this? Is my friend Roger Rees, who's doing directing a play in Princeton. Now, Roger Rees, I don't know if you know.
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, Roger Rees, R-E-E-S, was one of the greatest actors, literally. He's known as an English actor, came out of the school. I think he came out of like Royal Shakespeare Company, Royal Shakespeare Company. Then, as a 20-year-old, they gave him the part of Nicholas Nickleby on Broadway and on the West End. So if you see Nicholas Nickleby from the 70s or early 80s, that's Roger Rees. And he was literally, I don't exaggerate, he was an icon, right?
Wow.
He happens to be in Princeton.
I'm showing
right?
my hand and how little I know.
Right. It's a generational thing. But so he did the reading, the first reading of it, which was tough for me, because it's one of those situations, like when Paul Giamatti was in my play, I didn't know whether I was good or they were just brilliant. You know what I mean? Or where did that, it's a real problem for playwrights when you get those people in you. Sure. Because you're like, am I? They're laughing at everything, they love everything. Like if I give this to anybody else, will it, be the same effect? But to have Roger Rees do that reading was just phenomenal and helped push it toward the world and got it out into the world. And then I think 2010 it was done first and then has been done subsequently. But no, the birth of the play they're never easy, because you have to both protect it but be reckless with it. You have to put it out into the world and understand, some people aren't going to like this, but like with your children, you don't give a crap. You love your child. I don't care if somebody thinks they're not. You know what I mean?
I do.
So that was an interesting way for it to begin. Definitely,
That's fascinating. And now Adopt-A-Sailor has got a current life, not just with the existing film, but you're taking it and you're doing a 20-minute version, as I recall.
That's right.
Something like that, a different cut, sort of in the middle between the big version and the original version, I'm guessing.
Totally.
And the goal is to raise funds for EVERED House, which we can talk about in detail in a second, but it's an organization you put together for veterans.
That's right. It's an artist residency for veterans, because I didn't have enough to do, and I wanted to lose money as much as possible. So I started a nonprofit. And it's an artist residency for veterans. And in order to get the word out there, I ceremoniously announced, like years ago, we're going to do a reading of Adopt-A-Sailor in all 50 states. And as the word states came out, I thought, no, all 50 states. And so we do. We have a 20-minute version of it. It's been amazing.
How many states have you got under
30.
your belt? 30 now, 20 more
so
to go.
this summer, I'm doing literally, wait, if you saw this map, you would throw up just from the movement of the map. I'm doing like 18 states in a row, driving over 1 month. And but it's been amazing. I meet so many people. I see parts of the country that are just a pleasure to meet and see and be in. So I have no complaints. It's been great.
Wonderful. And Everett House is founded in honor, I guess is the correct word, of your father.
Dad, yeah, he was in World War II.
Wow.
Yeah, he was in the Army Air Corps in World War II. And he died in 1979, so I only knew him for 14 years. But kind of dedicating this effort to him was a way to kind of re-meet him, you know, and to kind of keep him in my life and keep him in my family's life. And so it's been a great honor to do this. And I love we had the first house was in California, Joshua Tree. And we had our first artists there, and it was great, you know. And then I moved to Virginia, so we moved the program to Virginia, and now we're building a cabin in Port Haywood, Virginia, which is right on the Chesapeake. We have a beautiful. You have to come see it. I will get you out there.
I'm looking forward to it.
But in fact, I think I got you for the reading, didn't I?
I wasn't going to bring it up.
I think you said yes.
I did indeed.
And I want to make sure you do that on tape, so if you try to get out of it.
So I have that. I'm looking forward to it. Very much.
No, it'll be great.
Really
so we hope to have that done by the fall, and we're just thrilled. So we'll do number 50 in my hometown, you know, in Virginia. Wonderful. And I can't believe we're actually going to do the 50, but I'm so glad we did it.
50 states. And you served as well.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I served as a Navy lieutenant in the reserves for 8 years, and it was a strange version of life, because I was writing a screenplay for Spielberg, to drop another name, but I was writing a screenplay for his company. It was called Carrier, and I sold it. It was about an aircraft carrier.
I remember something about it.
And one way to do research was they put me together with 2 producers and me as the writer, and they brought us down to San Diego to go visit a literal aircraft carrier. And something didn't work out with one of the producers' cars, so he rented a car, and he rented a limo, which is the most embarrassing thing you could actually do, is to show up in a limo from Hollywood with 2 producers. And as you get out, the whole point is to talk to these kids that are running a giant city on the water.
Sure.
So there's 6,000 kids, most of which are like 18 to 24. They're running this boat. They're being paid almost nothing. They're living on the racks, these little bedrooms or little little places to sleep on the boat, you know, and you're trying to get to know what their life is like. So the first thing I did was get away from the limo, right, and get walking around the aircraft carrier. And then the guy who gave us the tour, named Steve Fish, subsequently a great friend of mine and my family's, takes me around, and I'm 33 or 34 or something. At the end of the tour, which was fascinating, he said, "Oh, hey, did you ever think about joining the reserves?" And I was like, no, because I'm a big-time Hollywood screenwriter. I don't know if you read the... He's like, no, you know, it's only 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a summer. And of course, I'm thinking to myself, gee, I hadn't been with my dad for so long. I'd love to serve in some small way. So I said, sure. I mean, hit me up, like send me a whatever. And then got that, I looked at it, and it says 1 weekend a month and stuff like that, and 2 weeks summer. I was like, you know what, I can do this. So, you know, Wendy, the mother of my kids, bless her heart, so she thought she was marrying a writer, and then suddenly I'm becoming a naval officer.
Right.
It's a little bit of a switcheroo there. But went in, they said I'm going to become an officer right away because I'm in the direct commission program, and I had a master's. So that would make me go right into the officers. As it turns out, not so much. There's been a couple of years it takes. It isn't that fast. So I'm 34 years old, and I'm wearing this little hat, and I'm wearing the pants that flare out, and I'm picking up cigarette butts in Point Mugu Navy Base north of Malibu, and I'm washing dishes, and I'm doing whatever, and like the best thing that ever happened to me, like humility and understanding what the world's really like. Real diversity, meaning like we were literally rich, poor, white, black, every color you could imagine, and we had to live together, and that was great too. And it was just a blessing. It was a great blessing that I didn't plan for, but that led to Adopt a Sailor, because the premise of Adopt a Sailor is a young sailor goes to a very snotty couple in New York City, and there's a thing called Fleet Week, which is real, that I worked on. And in order for him to be able to get along for a couple days, they'll buy him dinner, they'll take him out, they'll do his laundry, they'll let him stay there, whatever. So when you put a young sailor who's from Turkey Scratch, Arkansas, and you put him together with Upper West Side, an art dealer and a filmmaker, that's an interesting marriage there, right? And that's where that came from, because I had lived on the Upper East Side and I was a writer, and I was in the Navy. So those two worlds combined. So I have that, I have the Navy to thank for not just the honor of serving, but to teach me so much by that service, but also for that story that has been, I think, the one that's gone out into the world most. So,
wow,
interesting journey.
Yeah, I should say so.
You know?
And it's interesting how it folds back around, because it has occurred to me, I was reminded, even as you were saying that when, so I'll sort of put all this together and say that
synthesize
I'm going to
everything
try
in
and
my life.
synthesize
Ben.
everything in our combined experience.
Okay, but do it under 4 minutes.
But
Go.
I will start though by saying, sort of leading into this, saying that I am incredibly thrilled and overjoyed, and these are not really the best words, but they are accurate, if not all-encompassing, to be working with you still.
Thank you.
After all these years.
We worked together a while now.
We have.
Yeah.
I mean, we've known each other for a long time,
True.
and then the first time we really worked together was in
I was
Joshua
14,
Tree.
I think, when we met.
I was.
You were 8.
Barely a zygote, as I recall. No, I mean, we worked together in the desert in Joshua Tree on An Actor's Carol, on the premiere of your play An Actor's Carol, where I got to play opposite Barney Miller.
You were
Hal
so
Linden.
funny.
Oh, thank you. But
I mean, Hal Linden thought you were funny.
well, it made my day.
Come on.
There was
an 85-year-old Hal Linden in the desert.
It was an absolute joy. One of my favorite things about Hal Linden, and I don't mean to tell tales out of school, but I love.
Oh, he'd love it.
He's been in the industry for so long, and obviously worked with so many great artists. I mean, it's funny how I used to say anyone who's been on the Muppet Show has a special place in my heart.
Was he in the movie or the show?
He was on the show,
Wow.
but then of course, Austin Pendleton was in the movie.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, he's a big part of
my
the
gosh, I
first
didn't know
Muppet
that.
movie. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'm going to see him.
Yeah,
Holy
take
crap.
a look at it. It's pretty funny.
Wow.
It's funny that connection is made. I'm a big Muppet
Great.
fan, but that's an entire
And Louis
tangent.
Zurich. You know Louis Zurich?
I don't know.
Great actor.
But I mentioned this to say, you were directing. I don't know if that had been your original plan for An Actor's Carol, but I
forget.
know that you came in and ended up directing us on that play as well.
That's right.
And Hal would sit and listen to you quietly. And in the middle of your speaking, occasionally he'd have an idea, and it was the politest,
How nice
the
of you to
politest
say.
interjection ever. He would just jump in with, excuse me, and I love that
Those
so
two words.
much. The excuse me.
Oh
and it
my
was
God.
the consistent, and you could tell this was a practiced
Totally.
and clear, polite way of asserting oneself into a creative process.
right.
And I'm no disparagement. I was impressed.
He's a super pro.
Exactly.
I love
That was
him.
what was amazing
Yeah.
about it. But just I can still hear Hal Linden's voice just breaking in and saying,
my
excuse me,
gosh.
excuse me.
Oh my
And then
gosh.
jumping in. I love that
I mean,
so much.
the dude, right? Tony Winner. Everybody knows him from television. He's Barney Miller.
Mm-hmm.
And we sent him the play. Like somebody had mentioned him. I thought, oh, he's great. I mean, I love Hal Linden. Grew up with Barney Miller. Love his humor and stuff like that. He's a song and dance guy, actually. He does great musicals. He's actually a player. He sings and he plays something.
That's right. I believe it
We
was
went
the
to a
Claire
concert
Ned,
or something. Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean,
he's got
all
an
this-
album.
And,
yeah, it's
and what
wonderful.
did we have? We had 40 seats, the friggin' desert.
Yeah.
I think he made, I hope this doesn't get me in trouble with you, he made like $214 a week.
Sure, I don't remember. I don't remember.
It was
making-
way more than you.
At some
But
point
the
in my
is-
life, I think I've made some money as an actor, but I don't remember.
The point is, Hal Linden says yes to the desert run, the desert premiere of this play about an actor who plays Scrooge all the time and has a nervous breakdown, right? He does it for $200 a week, right there.
Right. Yeah.
Enough said. And what? We got sold out every night he's there.
That's right.
But guess what? It was because of Hal Linden, right?
And I'm also going to drop Barry Cutler's name.
Yeah, a
because
brilliant
Barry
actor.
also.
They did it together.
They did it
Yeah,
together,
yeah.
and he was extraordinary. It was. He's
So
still a friend.
funny,
I
right.
consider him still a friend.
I didn't get to see him live, remember?
Oh, that's
I had to
right.
leave.
Oh, it's a shame.
But I heard nothing but brilliant things
No, the
about
both
him.
of them brought
Yep.
different things to it,
right?
and it made it that much more fun to play with.
It must have been like school for you.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
I mean, those two
Oh, hands
acting
down.
styles,
Hands down.
you know?
It was
fun.
no, it was phenomenal.
That was a
And I
great
bring up
time.
that whole experience mainly because during that time, Thanksgiving happened because we were leading up to the holidays.
Right.
And so we were staying with a friend of yours in the desert.
Right, Ron.
You brought in,
Right.
much like Adopt a Sailor.
Yeah,
there were a
those
couple
kids.
of servicemen
That's right.
who came and joined us
they
for
were so
Thanksgiving
sweet.
dinner.
Yeah.
And that's even what made me think of it. I'd slipped my mind,
Right.
and that was such an extraordinary experience
Yeah.
in and of itself.
I know.
We're sitting here talking about celebrities and the people
Totally.
they've met, and yet
Sure.
that was palpable.
Yeah.
I guess that's not the right word, but that was a meaningful experience
Yeah.
for me as well.
That's so cool. Well, not everybody's open to that, Ben.
True.
In other words, you saw them, you heard them, you talked to them, you heard their stories. I wish I could say everybody did, but not everybody does. So, kudos to you for being open to learning like that.
Well, and they were, as one might expect, the nicest, kindest, politest, gentlest humans.
I know.
And I was floored by that experience. I really was. I learned a lot just from that.
No, it's fun. It's, as you know, I sometimes say things I get in trouble for, but I won't now. But on this tour, Adopt a Sailor, in which we've taken it to theaters, to coffee houses, to private homes, to whatever, it's fascinating to see who's open up, who opens up to produce this with us and who doesn't. Without a exception, those places that are millions of dollar budget, that are known theaters, that have all the time and money in the world, are almost never open to doing our 20-minute reading. Those theaters that are community theaters, that are based in small towns where a lot of people serve, right? They have sons and daughters, and they have husbands and wives that have been, they clamor to do our little play. And that division, right, between the arts and those who serve is what my passion is, to build that bridge. And it's not a mistake that you and I are friends for so long. Because when I say that, like, we had that great Thanksgiving and these couple kids came by, right, from the base up in 29 Palms. Well, some people don't talk to them, Ben.
Sure.
Some people feel they're a little more special than them, right? Or they look at them in a certain way. And it has to be said, because that's true, And so I love it when people like yourself and people that I know and artists, they're open to everything, and they it's not about, I've been to so many events in which they'll introduce me and they'll say, so many artists will be like, Chuck does this thing, and even though we may not agree on policy and stuff like that, it's good to, it's like, we don't have to have that. Like, you know what I mean? That what would you call it? A joinder or whatever it is, this explanation. Like, we could all agree that those who serve deserve our respect. As I think actors deserve our respect because they're putting themselves up on the line, right? So that bridge I found, along with my career, is like my raison d'etre, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And I love that I surround myself with people like yourself. I'm not just saying this because you're here. That's one of the reasons why I thought you were so special when I first met you, because I thought that kid listens to people. A lot of people don't. Like, a lot of students know. In fact, they want to teach. Right? They want to tell you what they know, right? But you were like a sponge, and you still are. You have so many different interests and stuff like that. But that's what makes me really, like, just your having that memory of them makes me feel good. So thank you for reminding me.
Of course.
Absolutely.
And I think, sort of wrapping things up on that point, to say that what are we doing as artists if not exploring all the points of view? If not, because it's so easy when it comes to, there's a difference between, like, say, art and agitprop, right? For any side or any argument of anything, right? And if it's empathy, sympathy, this is what we're here to elicit from an audience in the moment while we're on stage or up on the screen, but also in the content and the themes and the ideas that we work within and try to explore. It's not about saying necessarily, although in some cases perhaps, to say what's right and what's wrong, and depending on what we're talking, what the field of discussion is. But ultimately, it's about exploring the grays and understanding where one belongs in it, and sort of to bring it all home there, class is that within its microcosm of subject matter. It's all about bringing different perspectives and finding what happens when you do let down those walls. For whatever the reason.
Scary, but beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's absolutely scary. It's two very different people that shouldn't be hanging out. And I just, that's, if there's a little hint I could give to playwrights, it's like, put people in the room that aren't like each other. Or that may not immediately like each other.
And bring them in tune together.
That's right.
With this experience.
Make them work it out. That's what drama is. Make them work it out. Whereas so many times, I think Mamet said it best when he calls those plays, he uses a bad word, but he calls them, for lack of a better... I know, it's hard to believe. But he calls them blank hole plays, or, and he says they're blank hole plays because if you don't agree with their premise, you're an asshole. So, and he's right. Like, what was the death of theater the last few years, or the last couple of years, is so much of that theater in which people are writing, we exactly agree with what they're saying. And we see the experience and we're like, you're right. That's wrong. You know, and then we go out to dinner, and what do we say? I agreed with that. Did you see the part where they did exactly what I wanted them to do?
Sure.
And then we go, so nothing happened. Whereas the theater we're talking about from the 1930s, Clifford Odets and O'Neill and Miller, you know, they wrote things that made the audience question their own beliefs. They didn't kind of highlight their beliefs and said, you're good. You know, this is a play that agrees with you. What they said was, I'm the artist. I go right to the core of who you are, and I disagree with it, and something's really wrong here. And that's why when you hear Miller describe at the end of the first curtain call of Death of a Salesman, so the lights would go down back then, and the lights would come up, and the actors bowed, and no one did anything. Okay, there was no applause. There was no anything. They didn't know what to do because several men in the audience were bawling and crying. And why were they doing that? It was because Miller, after the post-war, everything's great, and blah, 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 and we're going to go with that. He dared write about the heart of the problem, right? It was something's killing us, right? It wasn't even a political play. And if you read, I'm rereading his book now. If you read it, it wasn't a political play. It was a humanistic family play, right? And people got up, and they would get their coats and shuffle around, and nobody did anything. And then and then it became a storm of applause.
Wonderful.
Know? But who would know? You know?
Yeah, there are a couple quotes from class that just come to me in what you're saying, come to me from what you're saying, which is, one is the scared is great.
Yeah.
Try to be scared as much as you can be, especially in performance.
Definitely.
And that's to your point. And along with the idea, and this is a little out of context, but what you were saying, it's a slippery slope, this giving oneself over to the art, giving oneself, taking down the walls, right? But it's a thrilling one. And that's, I think, why we do it.
True. No, absolutely. I mean, you remind me of those parts of the play that I really clued into when I wrote it, 20-something, is it? I don't know. It's 2008.
I think the publication's 2010.
Right.
And
how many years ago did I write it? I'm bad at math.
Oh, don't put me on the spot like this.
Bad. 2008 and 2024.
16?
12. Yeah, like 16.
Yeah.
You're right, of course. That's a while ago.
Yeah.
You know? That's amazing.
That's a kid who can drive.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Barely drive, I guess.
And that was something, we won't get into the details of it, but it's funny how much the world has changed. Because I know you wrote it then to be the present. That's what it says in the book, I believe.
Yeah, right.
And we had to have a couple of discussions about a few things in there, just because when we're dealing with...
Updating,
Yeah, just a little bit here and there.
But I was right, wasn't it? It's still the present.
It's still the present. No, yeah, at the heart of it, 100%, it does remain the present.
No, but you brought up some things absolutely that I'm glad you re-looked at, and you looked at it in a different way. I love that the play's living and that it's breathing and it's going on.
It was because I would have been happy to have said this is set in 2008.
Sure.
Right? But
it would have confused people, though.
I mean, perhaps.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, why?
Yeah.
Right? So, okay, if we're going to say it's the present, then just a few things we want to tweak.
Sure, absolutely.
So I hope this has been as exciting for you as it has been for me.
It's been great.
This has been wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you again so much.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for doing this, and thanks for inviting me to Charlottesville. I love it here, and I hope people see it. I really hope to see people there.
I hope they do too.
You know, it'd be a drag if it were just me.
Well, you'll be there for a talk back on the first night.
Yes.
And that night's already sold out.
Oh, great.
So fortunately, everyone who's watching this will have a chance to hear from you. And anyone who already has tickets to that will have a chance to ask you questions as well, which is I'm very much looking forward to.
Very cool.
And I think that's about it. I will go ahead and just wrap things up and say that does it for our conversation today. Thank you again for joining me today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Our production of Class runs 2 weekends, February 23rd to the 25th, and March 1st to 3rd, 2024, depending on when you're watching this, at the Studio D space above Jack Brown's downtown Charlottesville. So for more information, feel free to check out gotostudio.com/class. And for more information about the EVERED House, you can go to everedhouse.org.
Right. With a D, EVERED.
Right. EVERED
house.org. Exactly.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
That's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Chuck. I really
My
appreciate
pleasure,
it.
Ben. Thank you for doing it. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
Cool.
My pleasure.